Hi everyone, Petrik here. In today's conversation with authors, we have Peter Orullian, the author behind A Song of the Dead, the first book in the Strata Wars trilogy, written together with Brandon Sanderson, and also he wrote The Vault of Heavens, if I'm not mistaken. And so, Peter, please introduce yourself to the audience.
Hello, I'm Peter Orullian. I'm an author and musician. Most of my fiction involves music in some way, and most of my music tells stories in some way. So I always combine these two creative pursuits. Um, I've published several books, some with Tor books, an epic fantasy trilogy with Tor, and then I've done some novelizations for big rock and heavy metal bands, novelizing concept albums to flesh the story out. And I published a couple of other books. And then as a musician, I've written and recorded records. I've been a touring musician. I've got my own group now called Symphony North, and we usually I compose the music for that group, and it's usually concept albums again, telling stories, and we've toured those. And so yeah, that's who I am. I'm those are my two creative interests, and I always find ways to combine them.
Okay, so how long have you been a musician and author?
Well, I probably, the first I started publishing short stories
Yeah.
before I got my novel deal. But the first I sold the trilogy to Tor, I want to say around 2010.
Okay.
It was around there when, so that was I'd published, I don't know, maybe 10 or 12 short stories before that. And it was back in the day when anthologies were, I think, more common.
Oh,
Publishers did, especially DAW, they had an anthology sort of line. And I don't see anthologies as often as I used to, but I was fortunate to publish a number of short stories there, and that was good training for the trilogy. And so then I got the trilogy around 2010. And I had been a musician, and of course before that I was writing, as a, learning, going to seminars and workshops and conferences and practicing. I've been doing that for, at least 10 years before that. And I live in Seattle, and I moved to Seattle to pursue music. And so, I did classical voice training here,
uh,
and that was in the late '90s. And then I was fortunate to get on a couple of tours, fronting groups that were doing tours mostly through Europe. And
oh,
so, I was singing at big festivals, and that was a lot of fun. And so that was when I was probably became a real professional musician. And then later, I did some work around town here in various groups, released some music, and finally established my own group about 2017. That's
oh,
Symphony North. So yeah,
oh.
most of the time they've kind of been, you know, working in parallel.
How do you feel about this? I mean, although both of them are basically in the same creative section of the industry, but at the same time, musicians perform in front of a lot of people. Authors are they do not. They write alone usually most of the time. How do you
Yeah.
feel about all that?
Well, you're right. Most of a writer's life is very solitary. I mean,
Yeah,
there's definitely book tours,
yeah,
and if you're Brandon Sanderson and you do a book tour, it's a big audience.
yeah,
You're in front of a big audience. And I guess that's performance of a type, different, of
yeah,
course. I mean, it's mostly conversation or question and answer. But it's, that's a very small percentage of the time being a writer. Um,
yeah,
yeah, and I guess there are conventions and stuff, and you sit on panels. So there's definitely a public aspect to being a writer, or at least can be.
yeah,
It's an interesting question. How I think writers do that a lot for their audience. I'm not sure how many writers do that, for themselves. I think fans and readers want to meet the writer. They want to ask questions. They want to get signatures. things
Yeah.
like that. A lot of writers are quite introspective. You know, uh, they're not sort of um, what is the word? The people who are extroverts. You know, a lot of writers are more introverts.
Yeah.
But but all of that said, most of their time is sitting at the keyboard and creating. Right, 99% of it.
Yeah.
Uh, so the difference, you know, for me, um, as a musician, there's definitely a lot of time where you're composing the music. But then when you begin to like rehearse the music, you're doing it with other people.
Yeah.
When you're in a studio recording, usually there's other people involved. I mean, you can do a lot of that at home now with software and the right gear. But you know, the aim for most musicians is, at least part of it, is performance, and
Mm.
that's a very different thing than a book tour.
Yeah.
When you're the art is the thing you're performing, and it's I will say that the experience of singing, because I'm a composer, you know, I
Okay.
write the music, but I'm also a vocalist. Singing for a crowd of thousands of people who are, you know, singing every word with you, that's a feeling unlike anything I've ever felt. I mean, it's
Yeah.
very unique.
Yeah.
It's a rush. It's you know, you crave it once you've done it. You know, you want to be there again. You want to be in that moment. So you know, and you can't live in that moment all the time, because even if you're a
Yeah.
touring musician, you know, the tour is a couple of hours of a day, and you know, the rest of the time you're on the road and you're in hotels and you're on a bus. So it's not all glamour, but I
Yeah.
will say that that moment of performance is wonderful. I mean, it's thrilling, and I always I look forward to whenever I have an opportunity to perform live. It's that immediacy of the experience with the audience and the fan is hard to hard to
Yeah.
relate and hard to beat.
So, do you find a concert more nerve-wracking, or book release?
Um, you know, it's the kind of thing where there's nerves up until the moment it happens, and then the nerves are kind of they go away.
Yeah.
Because you know, you want to do well, you want people to enjoy the thing that the art you're going to provide.
True.
Um, but like, you know, when you start a show, there's some nerves before the show starts, and then once the show begins, that's gone.
Mm.
Um, you know, with a book, I don't know, I can't speak for all writers, but I think you always, you know, it's a hard thing to know if you know how it's going to respond with readers. So there's a little bit of nerves, but mostly you're excited because you've been working on this story for many months or years, and you're excited for people to get a chance to read it. So
Yeah.
I think in both cases it's a blend. And then once the things, you know, launched or begun, you know, then it's just, you know, uh, then you're fine.
So, how long did it took you to write Songs of the Dead together with Brandon, like from the beginning?
Well, it was a long journey because when I first reached out to him,
Yeah.
um, and he called me up and said yes, you know, because I reached out about possibly doing a collaboration, and he called me, you know, a few days later, and he had a project then called Death by Pizza that
Yeah.
uh, he thought would fit because he'd read some of my books because he had blurbed them, and he knew that I had been a part of the rock and metal culture. He knew that I'd um, written music and toured as a musician, and I could bring that authenticity because the Death by Pizza had the main character was a heavy metal singer living in London,
Yeah.
and Brandon very astutely, when he collaborates with somebody who brings a strength to the project that he himself doesn't have. You know, in
Mhm.
this case, you know, everybody knows Brandon's an amazing writer, but he hasn't been
Musician.
a part of this music culture, and
Yeah.
he knew I had. And you can, of course, do research as a writer to provide what you call an authentic detail
Mm.
in order to, you know, be convincing. I mean, writers, um, you can write as a legal thriller or a medical thriller, And you
Yeah.
don't have to go through 12 years of medical school to write a medical thriller. But having said, because you can do the research and get the details right. But having said that, whenever you read a medical thriller from someone who's been through medical school, it's different because there are things that they will add that you can't know really unless you've been through it. So that's why I think the pairing, Brandon saw the pairing as a good opportunity. So that was the beginning, and then it was, Brandon is one of the biggest writers in the world, and so that we had to work out, the collaboration arrangement between us and make sure that was just right. That took some time. We built the World Bible. That took time. We did some series architecture work, mapped out at a high level the trilogy. Did a short outline for the first book, and then we were doing like weekly calls to go over things, and I started to do the line by line writing once we had all of that, foundational work done. And then in those weekly calls, we would triage things that came up in the writing, story questions, things that we hadn't accounted for in the World Bible or in any of the other materials that we'd created. And so that went on for a while. And then once there was a draft, I sent the draft to Brandon. He went through some places. He did some rewrites, places he would do some editing. He would have some comments in the margins. And then I took that and I went through and I did a pass with all of those notes. And then that went to the agent. And our agent has, there are some agents who only just mail books in. They don't really participate in having an opinion about the book. Our agent is the other kind. He's the kind that has story notes that he wants you to consider. So he sent us some story notes, and some of them were sort of non-trivial. I mean, there's some things that really he wanted us to address. So at that point, I just said to Brandon, because I knew Brandon had a couple of really big projects he was on, I'll just take care of these. And so I got in and did a revision based on those notes. And then I sent Brandon all the changed stuff, right? Really kind of focused his time on the places where there was some revision. And he went through, he read those, he had some notes on those. And then I did one more pass, and that's what we sent out. So it took, and in the meantime, he was finishing Wheel of Time and doing Stormlight Archive that he had just started. And I was doing the trilogy for Tor, and then I had these novelizations for the band Dream Theater. It's yeah. So they're, for folks who don't know, they're a Grammy Award-winning, progressive metal band. Probably yeah, they are awesome. Yeah, they're my favorite group in the world. Like, if you ask me the desert island question, I'm taking Dream Theater records. And I know the guys, and they've done a couple of big concept albums, and so I got the opportunity to work with them to novelize those. And so, I had other things going on too. And so in the background, we were, slowly advancing Songs of the Dead. And so it gestated for many years, over revision, the fact that both Brandon and I had some other things we had to do. And, so now finally, and then of course we did the deal, and after you do the deal with Simon and Schuster, then it's a couple years before the book comes out, because then it goes into their process, right? They have editorial, and they have cover design, and then they have to have sales meetings with the channel and all the work back scheduled to get them out to the bookshelves. So it's been long. But the good news is now all the groundwork's in place. I'm deep into book 2, and the plan is to have the first trilogy, one book a year going forward.
Nice. One book a year, so finish in 2028 then.
Yes. And then, if fans like these books, they like this world and these stories, the architecture we built, it kind of pivots on cities in the world that have deep history, so London that was part of the choice for London. The other choice for London is because it's the birthplace of heavy metal.
Uh,
But the architecture we built for the series is such that the next trilogy could be or would be in another city with deep history, like Athens or Cyprus or
ah,
someplace.
yeah. Wow, that's cool. That's really cool.
In fact, if you read in the first book, in Songs of the Dead, there are what I call story hooks that
Mm.
show you that these other cities around the world that have these deep histories um, have a strata. Strata is a thing in the book. Effectively, what it is time, eras of history that have accreted into layers beneath London. We call them the strata. And our magic users, which we call thanatists, the
Yeah.
magic system is called thanaturgy. A thanatist can descend into the strata. The strata has several layers. There's a modern layer, which is like from today through through 1900. Then there's like a Victorian period, a Renaissance period, a medieval,
Oh,
Saxon, Roman, etc. So there are story hooks that show you that other cities who have deep history have strata as well. And so we've intimated already that we could tell stories in other cities around the world. So fans
yeah.
like these books. The idea is that we could do other trilogies, and if that happens, I think there would be 4, maybe 5 trilogies that we've got cities that we've thought about, and then a capstone book that would like bring all of the tension across all of the trilogies into one like great confrontation.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so
That's amazing.
it could be an extended series, a lot like Dresden Files or something, but it will just depend on how well this first trilogy does.
Yeah, that's understandable. But if it happens, that would be super cool, man. The
Yeah,
idea is super cool.
yeah.
But you might actually end up with more than 5 trilogy, though. There's a lot of city in this world with a lot of deep history.
Yeah, yeah, and we could even, you know, the trilogies don't have to be wouldn't necessarily have to be all set in one city. We
Yeah,
could the trilogy could book to book hop to different cities. So we have a lot of options. The
yeah,
architecture for this world, this sort of alternate world we've built, is really rich. I mean, it's ostensibly it's a first world story because it's set in London, but because there's magic and all of these other things, it's not really our world, right? But it's considered a first world story because it's set in places we know in our world. And so, yeah, for that reason, and because we've designed this magic system and this global tension that between the present and the past. I mean, that's one of the things I think was most fun for me is um, creating this tension between the strata, which
yeah.
is populated by a kind of soul. We call them semblances. It's not a full soul. The idea is that after death, in our world, souls kind of move on through this place called the asphodel meadows, through a mountain of fire, to whatever
Mm,
comes next, right? That's the mythos. But that for some who have lingering dreams that are unfulfilled, or grief that's unaddressed, or other things that they didn't quite deal with in mortality, they descend into the strata as a semblance. And then the opportunity is over a longer period of time, they can maybe strive towards moving on as well. So the strata has a meaningful function. But what's happening in the world in the series is the topside world, through its neglect of the past, the
mm,
stories of the people of history, or its marginalization of those people, or its revision of their stories, right? Revision of history. These things are compromising these souls in the strata from this chance to move on. It's
uh,
constricting the strata, and some of them are literally kind of winking out because who they were is kind of falling into obscurity, right? Either because they're being neglected, or who they
forgotten.
really are is being so portrayed inaccurately by the real world that they're winking out. So there's a thanatist in the strata who is leads what we call a schism. Schisms are like the factions in this world. There are like 5 or 6 schisms. He leads a schism, and they want to bring revolution against the topside world for doing this, because he's a bad guy, but he's got a tenable reason for what he's doing. He's trying to preserve the strata and the opportunity of the souls that are there. And it's all these people are reflections of the past. And many of them are actual people from the past. So
Mm,
like there's a character by the name of Joseph Bazalgette, And
Okay.
most people don't know who Joseph Bazalgette is. Well, he's the guy. He was an engineer. He came up with a sewage uh, pumping technology that would, at the time of the Great Stink in London, when the sewage was basically sitting in the city and causing cholera and people were dying. So
Yeah.
he came up with this way to pump the sewage, these stations, to manipulate the levels of the water and stuff in order to push it out into the river. And
Oh,
so obviously that's problematic in and of itself, but it got it out of the
yeah.
city and it saved the city. But this guy's fallen into the margins of history because most people don't know who he is. So he's
Yeah. I
part
don't
of
know who
this.
he is.
Yeah, who does? And so he's part of this team that wants to remediate this problem and make this revolution happen, so that to save himself and to save others like him. And so there's a number of people like that from real history who we probably
Okay.
don't recognize, but who are very meaningful. And so they're helping to foment this revolution. And so that's a long answer to the question around, or at least the thing that I was trying to describe, which is this tension between the present and the past as conflict. And so it's the bad guys, so to speak, have a real reason for doing what they're doing. Maybe they're overreaching, and the
Mm.
top side people, where they're I won't do spoilers, but
Yeah.
sometimes it's in ignorance, sometimes it's not. But anyway,
Mm.
so that's that architecture that we wound up with is what gave us, I think, this huge palette to paint on, and or to paint with, and so we've got if people like the stories, there's a lot of opportunity.
Awesome. That's amazing, man. And you recently visit London, right? And I believe when you visit London just very recently for MCM Comic Con London, uh, some of the death has been written. It has been finished. But let's say if it weren't finished yet, would you change things after you visit the real location of London now?
No, I did a pretty thorough job
Okay.
of the places I used. What did happen though is, as I was walking around London and visiting some places, I got a lot of ideas for the next two books.
Ah, see?
So I have an outline almost completely done for the second book. And this outline is very extensive. I mean, I think
Mm.
it's already 25,000 words, just the outline. And
Wow.
but when I went to London, I saw some things and some places, and because I did a lot of walking, I got a lot of
Yeah.
flavor. So that was really, really good. I've been to London before, but it had been like 10 years.
Yeah.
And before I even started writing this book. So yeah, so I don't think there's anything I would change, but now there's a lot of stuff I'm going to include in the next couple of books.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And you mentioned it has been 10 years since before you wrote Songs of the Dead, I think. And I'm just curious, if I'm not mistaken, the Unremembered actually came out in 2015. So it has been quite a while
Oh,
since
it's
then.
2015. Okay, good.
I think I could be wrong. I could be wrong. But what do you feel like? What's the struggle in getting back to writing novels again? I mean, it's been quite a while since the Unremembered.
Well,
Or the
after the Unremembered, I did the second book in that trilogy called Trial of
Yeah,
Intentions.
yeah.
Um, so there was a book after that. Then I wrote two books for Dream Theater. One is called The Astonishing. The other is called Scenes from a Memory. I
Okay.
wrote with my music group Symphony North, because, as I said, everything we do is narrative based. Like all the
Yeah.
music tells a story. That concept album I wrote is called The Bell Ringer. It's a
Okay.
holiday story, and I wrote the novel. I just novelized. I had novelized that, and I just sent that to my agent. So even though Unremembered was a while ago, I've
Yeah.
been writing novels all
Oh.
along. So I haven't ever sort of not been writing novels. It's just
Yeah,
I've been
yeah.
writing different novels. And then
Makes sense.
if the other thing is I've got a new epic fantasy world that I've been developing for the better part of 30 years. That's
Okay.
really rich. I've been spending a lot of time over my lifetime, writing part of its history and its magic and its people and its worlds, and like creating it. but never. I haven't ever yet. I've written some short stories, but I've never written a novel. So I'm anxious at some point to actually start writing novels in this universe because it's so rich now. It's so like populated with people and events and its own history. So I say that because if we're successful with Strata Wars, I'm going to have
Yeah.
to figure out a publishing cadence because I'm going to want to start interweaving this new epic fantasy.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Wow. Looking forward to that, man.
Yeah, yeah. So I should, hopefully I'll be busy for a while.
You are already busy.
I'm already busy. Yes, and I've got the second Symphony North album is all outlined. I've got the full novel for that outlined, and I'm really excited to write that one because it's a period piece set in Brooklyn, and
Okay.
so I've got a lot of writing projects lined up ahead of me. So
Yeah.
it's really just which one has a deadline.
See, one of the things that just came out recently from your writing is Unbroken. It's the Kickstarter campaign, Unbroken, and I think it's one of the best thing I think I've seen recently, where just people, book reviewers, book readers, authors just gather around to promote the Kickstarter campaign. And that's one of your short stories right there. But I'm just curious, like, when did the idea for the Unbroken start, the Kickstarter?
It was early in 2025.
20.
A
Oh,
friend,
quite early. Okay.
yeah, it wasn't very long ago. It was early last year. I was a friend of mine published an anthology called Unfettered,
Oh yeah,
like
Sean Speakman.
Sean Speakman. Yeah, about
Yeah.
12 years ago, maybe 15 years ago. And he and I were talking about some of our challenges in life, and it's the reason he had published Unfettered. And he was actually the one that suggested to me. He said, you know a lot of writers. Maybe you should reach out, see if you can put together a table of contents.
Oh,
So I did. I reached out to a bunch of the writers I know and just said, "Hey, I'm thinking of doing this thing. Would you be willing?" And I just got overwhelmed with the number of writers who said, "Yeah, happy to help." So I got enough responses that I knew I could do it. So I started putting together a table of contents and with some advice from Sean, some advice from Robin Sullivan, Michael J. Sullivan's wife.
yeah, yeah,
She's quite the dynamo. From Bryce O'Connor at Wraithmark. I had like
yeah,
these really great people um, with a bunch of their sort of guidance. I just pushed forward. I did put the book together, did the editorial, started reaching out to artists. Yeah, and it just came together. And then you don't know how things are going to go when you do a crowdfunding thing, but you hope. You keep your fingers crossed and you hope. And I was guarding my expectations because you don't want to be disappointed. But when
yeah,
when it went up, it did really well, and yeah, it was one of those moments where it's a testament to this community of writers and readers and artists who really do look after their own. They really, when someone's in need, I think
yeah,
they're very generous, they're very caring, and that's a beautiful thing. And I got to be a part of that recently. And by the way, the book is going to be amazing. I mean, it is amazing. Like the stories in it are, because I read them all. I did the editorial on them all. The people who back the campaign are going to get what they paid for because it's a great book.
yeah, yeah. I have no doubt, man.
And
I think I've
it's got amazing like writers in it.
Yeah, I've read only probably one. It's from Christopher Rocchio. Yeah,
Mm.
I've read the short story that's going to be put there. That's amazing. I've read only that one, and I loved it very much already. And I bet the rest of the books and the rest of the short stories or novelettes will be great as well. Plus, the artist that you guys have gathered is actually top tiered.
Yeah,
Top tier. Donato
Donato.
is one of my favorite artists of all time.
Yeah, he's amazing. Yeah,
Yeah,
he did those hands. I sent him a photo for reference, and he just took that to a new level. Todd Lockwood did an amazing piece. By the way, both and then Alan Morris did a piece, and Todd
yeah.
and Alan's pieces are actually scenes from Songs of the Dead.
Really that. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I remember Alan Moore's artwork. That's the North American. Is it North American version? Yeah.
No, that's the the Pacific Northwest edition.
Pacific Northwest. Yeah, the
Yeah,
Pacific
yeah,
Northwest edition. The cover art reminded me of the end paper in Songs of the Dead. I think it
yeah,
was the back paper, right?
yeah. You know what happened there is I sent Alan, told him, I said, hey, I want you to do this scene from Songs of the Dead, and he says, cool. So I sent him a creative brief, and then I don't know, a couple of months later, my editor and publisher at Saga said, hey, we're going to do end papers, and he actually didn't tell me what they were going to do. And then later, I got the first sketches, and it's like, oh, he chose the same scene. Yeah, so it's kind of fun to see like the different interpretations.
Yeah. It's still very similar, though. There's still some similarity, and I think that's just goes to show how the text portrayed the scene itself.
Yeah,
And that's nice. Yeah. And if you were to, let's say, you've been a writer for a long time now, if you were to choose 3 favorite, I don't know, books or series to recommend, which one would you recommend to the audience?
Does it have to be fantasy and science fiction?
Nah,
just
doesn't
anything.
have- Yeah.
Okay. Well, the first thing I always recommend is Summer of Night by Dan Simmons.
Oh, okay.
Dan Simmons, he unfortunately just passed away this last February, and he is my favorite writer. I loved him. I remember I was in a B. Dalton bookstore. It's now defunct bookstore chain in the United States. Maybe it was other places, but it's definitely here. And I found a Summer of Night, and on the back was emblazoned in big letters a quote from Stephen King that said, Dan Simmons writes like a hot rotting demon. I'm in awe of Dan Simmons. And I was like, and I'd been reading a lot of Stephen King at the time, so I thought, okay, well, that's a great praise. I'm buying that. And then I read that book, and it just bowled me over, man. I adore that book. Its protagonists are all of a certain age. They're all like in that 11-year-old range where they still believe, in the magic of childhood, but they're old enough to like really do something about problems. I just love that age, that sort of innocence to experience age. And anyway, so it's my favorite book. It's one of the few books I will reread. It's not a series per se. It is, though. Dan wrote some follow-on books that take some of those characters who were children in their adult lives that are also very, very good. So if someone reads that and they become a fan of the book, there are 3 other novels where those characters are grown-ups that are amazing.
Okay. I've read only Hyperion Cantos. I haven't read anything else beyond that.
Well, and that's the thing about Dan is other than like strict fantasy, he wrote almost everything. He wrote horror, science fiction. He wrote crime noir. He wrote thriller. He wrote mainstream. He wrote literary. Like he was, he could, and he did it all really well. So I always recommend that one. It's the other one I recommend because I adore short fiction. I wish more writers would write short fiction. But I really, really adore Stephen King's Night Shift.
Oh, okay.
And the reason for that is, I know it's kind of another horror book, but I picked that up in the Honolulu curio shop on my way back from my high school, like my graduation trip. And I had not really read a lot of contemporary fiction at the time. I'd mostly been reading like the canonical works that you read in English class in high school. And it just really opened my eyes. And that's when I started to write. I always had this sense that I wanted to maybe write someday. But after I read that book, I started writing short stories. So the stories are great. It means a lot to me personally. And I think it's also like, I would love for it to inspire writers to write more short fiction, because I think short fiction is a really wonderful format. Like, and if you need, a good example of this is Ted Chiang. Ted Chiang?
Yeah, Ted Chiang. Yeah, amazing.
I mean, his work is amazing. Almost everything he writes wins awards. And he only really writes short. Sometimes maybe novella length, but it's short fiction. He's never written a novel, and his work's
Yeah.
amazing. So he's perfected the craft of that short form. So I like that Stephen King one because it's got such a variety of stories. And then, this is not maybe the most popular pick, but I grew up when I started reading fantasy, reading the Shannara books.
Okay.
And
Terry Brooks,
Terry
right?
Brooks, yeah.
Yeah.
And I know his first book took a lot of blowback because people thought it was a Tolkien knockoff, which I think is
Yeah.
ironic because you could probably say the same thing of 80% of fantasy that
Yeah.
is in the store. But if that's a concern to you, read his second book, The Elfstones of Shannara. It's actually
Yeah.
Shannara. He pronounces it Shannara. I think that Terry, because he's been at it for so long, and we have new great names in the genre that are doing so much that sometimes he gets lost in the weeds. But he's an amazing writer. He creates this atmosphere that I don't think as many writers are enamored of atmosphere as they used to be. And I mean that's part of the reason I want to be absorbed in the fiction. And Terry does a very good job of that. And he has so many books in that series now. But
Yeah. Yeah.
The Elfstones is like maybe one of the best books he ever wrote. And it'll tear your heart out. And it is unique. It's it's its own thing, separate from any other sort of predicates. So yeah, so those are. I mean, if you ask me this in an hour, I would give you different answers, except for Summer of Night. Summer of Night's always on the list, but it changes. Sometimes I would probably recommend to you a nonfiction book because
Yeah.
I read a lot of nonfiction now because I do a lot of research for my writing.
Do you find reading fantasy more difficult now, ever since you became a fantasy writer?
Um, the only thing that concerns me sometimes is voice drift because
Hmm.
I'm a chameleon. So you know if I sit and read a whole bunch of Pat Rothfuss
Yeah.
and I'm reading, that's what's in my head. When I sit down, there's a risk that I might fall into his voice.
Yeah.
And that's not deliberate, but like I said, I'm a kind of a chameleon. Language for me is rhythmic and,
Mm.
the cadence of it and the phraseology. It's just kind of how my mind works. And so the risk for me is I don't want to have my voice drift into sounding like someone else.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean I don't read fantasy, but it means I have to be sort of judicious on like what I'm reading during what I'm writing.
Yeah.
Because I want my voice to be the thing that's on the page. I mean, we did that with Songs of the Dead. I mean, we never really considered that Brandon would do the line by line writing. That was always going to be my job. But
Okay.
part of the reason for that is valuable is that you hear my voice and not Brandon's voice, because part of the reason Brandon wanted to collaborate with me is because I've been a musician.
Yeah.
Because it's a first person narrative and I'm looking through Jack's eyes. Because I'm a musician, I see things
Yeah.
as a musician does. I always give the example, like in a book, if you're writing an architect and you walk into a new building or a new city, the architect will notice the architecture.
Yeah.
If you're not an architect and you're writing, a farmer and he walks into the city and you spend 3 pages talking about the architecture, I think it's wrong, because
Mm.
the farmer's not going to be thinking about all the architecture. He might be thinking about the food carts on, where are they getting their food to
Yeah.
sell, or whatever. So I think the lens of the character matters. And because I'm a musician, it made an additional sense that I do the line by line, because I would see things and notice things and write things that wouldn't occur to Brandon. And so
Mm.
it's my voice,
Yeah. Yeah.
my authorial voice that like pulls through.
Wow. This is super cool. I always like hearing ideas about how collaboration happen, because it always differs between each pairs. And this is a really cool one. I finally understand why Brandon chose you to work on Songs of the Dead. It's really
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah. Yeah, he does a collaboration with Jancy, and
Yeah,
I believe the impetus for that was Jancy's a wonderful YA author,
yeah,
and that wasn't something that Brandon really done much of, and so it made a lot of sense to partner on those things. But I know, like, I love Stephen King, as I've said, and when he does the books with Peter Straub, I believe I read somewhere that Peter has since passed, but they would trade chapters. So their
oh,
thing was
okay,
they would do it by chapters, and
yeah.
Stephen King said, by the end of it, we didn't know who had written which chapter because our voices had, you know, our had blended. So
Yeah, yeah,
and that just goes to show, I think a lot of writers you have the same risk. Like your voice can sort of evolve and take
yeah,
on the shape and feel of another voice if you're kind of working or exposed to it a lot. And that doesn't
yeah,
have to be a bad thing. In their case, it's a good thing because then it feels like there's a unity of the voice. But by the same token, you don't want to necessarily have people thinking, oh well, Peter's writing just like Pat Rothfuss. Which I don't know. Some fans might love that because Pat's one of the great.
yeah.
I mean his prose is beautiful.
Absolutely
Um,
beautiful.
yeah, and I mean I would read his prose even if there was no plot.
Yeah, true. I've mentioned the same thing as well. He
Yeah.
just knows how to write, really.
Yeah, his voice is unique and it's very
Yeah.
lyrical. Very lyrical. I love very lyrical writers. My favorite might be Ray Bradbury. I think he
All right,
might be one of the great like lyrical writers we've ever had. And he doesn't his name doesn't get as invoked as it used to
yeah,
in our genre. But I think he's one of the pillars that got us rolling. He was yeah, he's an icon to me.
yeah. I think he used to be so much more popular back then, especially
Yeah.
Fahrenheit and Martian Chronicles.
Yeah. Yeah, something wicked this way comes, and
Yeah.
um he was a great short story writer. He contributed to Twilight Zone for Rod Serling. He was a
Hmm.
great writing teacher. Like one of the great writers that I think is lost to the annals of time is Charles Beaumont. So Charles
Okay.
Beaumont wrote he wrote, I think, one of the best collections ever called The Howling Man. And some of those stories were the premise for Twilight Zone scripts. But
Okay.
it's some of the best short fiction I've ever read. And most people, when I say that name, don't have any idea who Charles Beaumont is.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, we have a very rich tradition in the genre, and obviously we live in a time where it's the conversation is dominated by current voices, but
Yeah.
there's a lot of great fiction that is not very old that I think some fans just don't get a chance to hear about. So whenever I do these kind of things, I try and throw a few out there, just hoping people maybe will give them a chance.
Yeah. I know. It has been weird. I mean, I started reading, like, really, really start to read epic fantasy novel, like I said, almost 10 years ago, and even then, the genre and everything has just changed so much since then. Like the way conversation happens. I remember back then, well, pretty much everything we talk about was Patrick Rothfuss, Joe Abercrombie, and also Sarah J. Maas, Brand Weeks, and Brandon Sanderson, of course. And now everything just really spiraled around. And it's just sometimes weird to see books that I loved like 10 years ago being called like, wow, nobody's talking about this. We were talking about that so many times back then.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like a hit maker business now.
Yeah,
It's this machine of producing content. And
yeah,
so and the winds changed, the taste changed. There was a period, if you go way back into the 80s, horror was everywhere. Like every
uh,
publisher was publishing tons of horror.
okay.
Great writers like Robert McCammon were being
Yeah,
published in those days. And Robert's still writing. He is an amazing writer, but people don't talk about Robert McCammon as much anymore unless they remember him from then. You
yeah,
have the
yeah.
period with Steam.
I love
Sorry, go
his
ahead.
books. Boys Life and Swan
Oh,
Song are some of my favorite books of all time.
100% agree. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
and he is a genius talent, that guy.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but then you had the period of steampunk, right? There was a period where like steampunk was everywhere.
Oh,
And there's probably still some steampunk novels on the shelves, but it's not like the main thing. And
yeah,
now we're kind of in a, I think, a pretty heavy period with romantasy. There's a
yeah,
lot of romantasy being published. And we'll see what happens. Does that become the staple, or
yeah.
is there another cycle after this one, and which writers will rise with it? Yeah, publishing is a very interesting thing. I remember being in workshops with professional writers who talked about that it's rare for a writer to have a career that's just like always up and on, and that has
Oh,
a lot to do with the trade winds of publishing, what's fashionable or popular. And so, some writers who are amazing will crash. And it's not
yeah,
because they suddenly stop knowing how to write. It's because, the industry around them changes.
that's change. Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, there's, a lot of those really wonderful horror writers, when publishers stopped publishing horror, if they couldn't write something different, they were out of a job.
yeah,
If you were one of the writers like crushing it with steampunk when steampunk was big, now steampunk's not so big. So if you're not able to sort of write something else, uh, you know, then it can be tough. So yeah,
oh,
it's an interesting, but then by the same token, if I'm going back to my example with Dan Simmons,
yeah,
Dan didn't choose a lane. He didn't only publish science fiction or horror. And sometimes the conventional wisdom is stick to one thing so that your fans know what you write and you can grow your audience. Well, I mean that works if your genre never like diminishes or goes through these changes. Like if you write romance,
yeah,
you're golden. But inside
mhm,
inside fantasy and science fiction, we have these permutations that kind of fall in and out of fashion. And some writers are above it and aren't impacted by it. But it's certainly, you can't chase the trends. I mean, I'm not suggesting that, because by the time you identify a trend, you're too late, because, you know,
true, true. Yeah,
yeah. Like, I mean, how many people are out there desperately trying to write the next Dungeon Crawler Carl
you know,
right now,
it's a lot. It's a
a
lot.
lot. And
Yeah,
maybe some will do it. But, you kind of just, you have to kind of throw your heart into something you like and believe in. And, you know, and I think you have to enjoy the process of the writing, because where we started with this whole thing was it's a pretty solitary job. So
yeah,
you're sitting there with yourself for hours a day. You better like the thing you're working on.
yeah. I just talked to Shentao. She's a debut author. She
Mm,
published The Poet Empress, and she talked about this actually because she tried to follow the market. She tried writing many times by following the market, what works in the market, and none of that actually really works nicely for her. So she just decided to write something that came from her heart, something that she really loves, and that's the only one that got published. And I think that goes to show just how important it is. I mean, this is art after all. And we
yeah.
talk about AI art and all that. That those are devoid of souls. And I think writing and also painting and everything, they need to come from something that we really love.
I agree with that. And I think that the value is if you write from that true source of yourself, and then you find people like it,
Yeah,
then you end up with a fan who will kind of stay with you forever.
yeah,
So they're a fan of you. They're not a fan of the genre.
mm,
If you go and you write if you had followed steampunk and started writing steampunk, um, really what you were like trying to get a part of is the steampunk audience,
yeah,
instead of an audience that was just in love with what you do. So,
mm,
but it's also maybe a little riskier or scarier just to go out on a limb and do something that's just from your heart,
yeah,
because it may or may not resonate with others. But you have to be the one sitting in the chair every day for hours. You have to enjoy those hours.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
So yeah, so it's an interesting, and even writers who do it very, very quickly, it doesn't happen overnight. I mean,
yeah,
it takes, if you're working really hard, you can write a novel in 2 to 4 weeks. If
mm,
it's a short novel and you're working crazy hours every day, but that's not the same as what these AI people are doing. I mean,
yeah,
writing a prompt and having their book done in a couple of minutes.
It sucks, man.
Yeah. It's the same thing in music. I read a thing the other day, 40% of all music uploaded to Spotify every day is AI music.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So I think, this idea we're talking about where, you put your own soul into it. I think hopefully the fans
Yeah,
resonate with that, and then they want to
yeah,
follow you so that you keep producing that as a human. Yeah.
man. These times.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. The arts are. I saw a graph not too long ago. It was talking. I don't know who produced the graph, but it showed the areas of industry that were most impacted by AI, and there were some that aren't, like anything where you're moving atoms. Where you're
Uh,
like physical, less impacted. But like finance, law, there were some that's like the spike came way up, and with arts and entertainment it was way up because it was suggesting that AI can do a lot of that work
yeah,
itself, and we're seeing that. What
yeah,
I hope happens is that these platforms wind up with some sort of filter or tag that says human created or AI created or something, so that
true.
we can hopefully we can filter out the stuff and support the humans. Because AI will continue to get better,
Yeah,
and
scary.
there'll be a point at which maybe some AI is not as discernible, you know, um, from a human created piece of art. And if that becomes the case, then I want to be able to know that my money is going to the human. That's why
Yeah,
maybe there's value in the conventions and stuff. You get to know the person, so you can
yeah, yeah.
support them. You know,
I
but
agree. And
yeah,
I don't know, I think the first time I went to convention like that, it was in 2024, Worldcon, and also Dragonsteel, Nexus. And I did not have any expectation whatsoever. I'm just thinking, what would I do there? I was thinking like that. Apparently, I could do so much there. We just met so many people talking about art, about books, and there's just endless. And I think there's a lot of authenticity in that conversation, in that gathering.
yeah.
And yeah, I agree with you about the importance of convention, especially in these times.
Yeah, I think that the thing that I thought a lot about this on the music side too is yes, you can write AI music, but the things you can't really replace is live performance, right?
Mm,
You still have to watch someone perform, and that sort of fan connection. So because you
yeah.
can't really be a fan of an AI. I mean, maybe you can, but um, I think that fans want to have some kind of relationship with the creator, and
Mm,
so real people, I think, feel that AI can't. They can't be a person that really talks to you. Certainly not a person you can meet in real life. And the
yeah.
same will be true for writers. You can meet them at a conference or at a convention. You can talk to them. You can follow them on their socials. You can watch them do things like this, and so you can develop kind of a rapport with them, and see them in real life, and then support their work if you enjoy it, their art. You can't, with AI, most of that falls down. All you can do is just like consume the end result.
True.
And by the way, the conventions and stuff are a lot of fun because that you also meet people like yourself who are part of the community, and
Yeah.
you make these great friendships. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So before we end this conversation, in these constantly shifting times and also industry, what do you hope the most for readers to gain out of reading Song of the Dead and maybe Unbroken?
Well, with Unbroken, I think the takeaway is, this fantasy and science fiction community is a really great
Yeah.
community. It's a family. Um, and not trying to marginalize like blood families. Like, those are very important, and
Yeah.
but there's a wonderful nature and nurture to the science fiction and fantasy community, and this book I think is a testimony to that. And the stories are also really amazing. So
Yeah.
it's like a two for one there. With
Yeah.
Songs of the Dead, it's somewhat similar. I mean, it is true that there's a lot of music references in there, and there's and it's not just rock and metal. There's classical, there's jazz, there's many musical art forms that are referenced and part of the story, but you don't need to know any of that to enjoy it. In fact, Brandon and I very deliberately made sure that it wasn't a gate. It's not a gatekeeper. In fact, if anything, the idea is you see that what it is these people, these friends have a shared passion in the same way we have a shared passion for science fiction and fantasy. They have a shared passion around this music, but it's not like that's the only thing they're about. So when they're together, they're talking about all of the things of their lives, right? Taxes or healthcare or, their kids or, all sorts of things because they're dimensional humans. And so I think that the takeaway, hopefully, for people with Songs of the Dead is the idea of found family. This idea that you may be bonded initially around a certain passion like music, but what it really results in is a set of people who are such good friends that they will stand up for you when you're in your most need. And that's what happens for Jack. He intellectually understands the idea of the community of metal, but he has some trauma from his childhood with his like real family, and so he has to kind of learn what it really means to have a found family. These people, these friends of his who are in his life and are willing to do anything to help him, and that's the prevailing idea of the book. So yes, there's a lot of cool music stuff. There's a cool magic system. There's a cool tunneling into history to meet cool historical figures. There's a lot of fun. There's cool battles, all that stuff. But like the thing I think the takeaway is, you can find your people, and you can find them in a lot of different ways. And you find the right people. They are that family that will be there for you when you need them.
Amazing. Amazing, man. Well, I think it is time to wrap up this conversation. And I just want to say thank you so much for coming to my channel. And I want to say congratulations. I'm going to publish this when the book is out. So congratulations on your publication, man. I wish you the best of luck. And I hope the Strata Wars will be extended to 5 or 6 trilogies.
That would be great. Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, man.
All right. Bye-bye. Take care.